Welcome, Reso. I'm so glad to have you here. How are you today?
Great, great, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This will be my second interview since first taking out what we call CTP,
Mhm,
going on roughly 3 years now. This is
mhm.
you're my second interview. Others that may be interested should also look up an interview called Reso Factor and the Nth Industrial Revolution on YouTube for further tie-in, with this interview for additional insights that maybe this interview will cover different ground, but I just wanted to have as much cross-referenced information available so people will get an idea of what CTP means ultimately, not just as like, in our for our proposals, like in terms like of a deep tech startup or anything. Oh, there are a million, startups out there in the world today. However, the implications of what we are proposing will ultimately revolutionize so many aspects of reality and life on our planet as we know within the coming decade to generation or so. So I just
Okay.
wanted to put
Okay.
that out there first. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I truly appreciate it. And I'm very, very honored to have you here today. Would you like to share your story before we start with the questions, please?
Sure, sure. Okay, okay. So this is a really strange. You almost call it like a providence or really a billion and one chance that I'm in the position that I am in today. Okay.
Mhm,
When I was a small kid, I always had a feeling that that I don't use like using words, big words sometimes. I really don't. But I always felt that I was destined for something outside of the ordinary that most people consider or happy with, an ordinary life. I always knew something else was kind of in store for me. Okay. Um, so around the time I was in my early 30s, there were a number of misfortunate events and other things that kind of like sequence wise drove me into being where I was. I was business networking, via MySpace and social, media at the time on MySpace, and there was this guy, kind of a big mentor kind of guy, interest that was in New Mexico, and I relocated to Mexico. Then the whole like craziness of summer 2005 happened with Katrina and Hurricane Rita that followed, that most people completely didn't even really get that there was another major hurricane, calamitous natural disaster that hit my home state of Louisiana. I was originally born and raised like in a small rural town in Louisiana. Okay, so like I said, I moved, relocated to New Mexico, and while I was living in New Mexico, prior to different business social networks we have today, okay, like we have LinkedIn. LinkedIn's maybe been around, a good 10 years or so, or whatever. But prior to what we would call modern business social networking, we had other sites like there like Academy. If anyone remembers Academy in the professional circle,
mhm,
Academy was really big. Thomas
mhm,
Power and the Powers founded that site are is no longer with us today, as far as those sites are concerned, but they are, thankfully. And then there was another business network it's still around, but I don't think it sees nearly the traffic volume that LinkedIn does. Anyway, this was called Rees,
mhm,
RYZE Business Networks. Okay, and I had set up, a profile page there.
mhm,
I was networking on Rees, and just through the whole sequence of events
mhm,
involved there, I eventually ran into this woman called Martha, who says that, and I joined one of these, business kind of community groups that you have on these different sites. I think it was called like something like New Tesla Emerging. Okay, so that sounds pretty vague to me. I don't really like. Okay, well that sounds like a cool name for a group. So I went ahead and joined the group, and eventually. So this woman named Martha eventually like introduces herself to me, and she says, hey, I'm this is me, I'm so and so, and I'm working, I'm networked with this guy. She wasn't necessarily directly like like a W-2 employee by United States like tax code standards, but she was affiliated loosely, at least,
mhm,
with this guy. And she said, okay, so I know this guy, and his name is Drazen, and he is doing the work that Nikola Tesla would have continued if Nikola Tesla were still around by our standards today.
mhm,
She was alluding to the fact, okay, well, this guy that this is the next heir of Tesla. This is the next successor of Nikola Tesla. So I'm like,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
okay. Okay. So anyone in our world today that knows anything about history, science, engineering, and all the what we call the higher thinking, what the name Nikola Tesla, I'm not referring to Elon's motor company, but really the man, the person, Nikola Tesla, as being one of the premier geniuses, like really of all modern, what we consider modern human civilization of our times, from going all the way back to until the second industrial revolution until today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that there could be someone no one's ever heard of in any real conventional sense, that there would be a real successor to Nikola Tesla. I was very piqued and intrigued
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when I was told this information. So okay, like wow, okay. So eventually, business introductions are always kind of rather mundane, regardless of who was like, even people trying to reach like guys like Bill Gates or Elon. And
Yeah.
start you start with your typical rather boring things like, well, here's an email. Here's the CC, or here's a blind CC, and you get tied in through the sequence of events that ultimately like connects everyone together. Okay, so eventually I started email exchanges with this guy. We're going to just refer to him for now as Drazen. His
Okay.
name was Drazen. Okay.
Okay.
Not Drazen Petrovic,
Mm-hmm.
just so we're clear. It's
Okay.
another Drazen. Okay. But anyway, his name was Drazen. And the first emails coming from this guy, I mean, it was like that. Okay. And so anyway, eventually we connected on the phone, and very early on, my doubts as far as to who this guy, said he was, the implications of his discoveries and what he was sharing with me, my skepticisms and doubts in who Drazen was were removed very, very early on. I mean, I'm like, this guy is the real McCoy. This guy is the next successor of Nikola Tesla.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's kind of where this story starts. So this is around 2004, 2005 ish, like timeline. What the bleep was released around, I think around mid 2004. So Drazen's initial like public revelation of CTP was shortly after the cult hit documentary What the Bleep Do We Know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that tried to connect what we would call our spirituality with quantum physics.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
was really the past 20 years when it comes to things like quantum consciousness, contemporary spirituality. What the bleep was really like a defining like cultural shift in healing and so many other like what we would call the frou frou or the woo woo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there was like, hey, we have like some type of science we think that finally quantum physics is really what applies to our spirituality. Okay, so I'm getting all this information from Drazen, regarding what CTP is, what's the nature of his science and his discoveries, and I'm like, okay, this is big by any standards. Like what he, the level of information he was sharing with me. I'm like, this is so big. I need to help this guy with his projects and his proposals. So I pretty much like signed on full time. From about 2005 to 2006, I was working remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but between different locations, and eventually in 2006, I actually relocated to Orlando, Florida, where his operations were located. He had some angel investors. He downscaled his original ventures. He had three ventures planned. One being New Europe, which was like a European brick and mortar themed kind of idea. The other was his private science he calls, CTP, and the other was a private space company he had planned called ISS. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
from about 2006 to 2011, I worked directly with him with his other startup, New Europe. And during that time, I was basically like being apprenticed and mentored in as many aspects of his science. I mean, the level, imagine working directly with like a Tesla, Nikola Tesla like mine for so many years.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What type of information, where your conversations would go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So our conversations were really that otherworldly in so many ways. And so, unfortunately, there were some other things, with the rather jungle-like or really harsh nature of startup world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
we were struggling to get traction with his European theme venture, which was rather safe. It's not like we were proposing, next century level sciences. We were just talking about like uh, candy and chocolate and European goods and product services kiosks. It wasn't really threatening like the status quo, but we should have easily got more traction with New Europe, which really it ultimately never happened. So around 2011, some of our smaller investors that were floating most of the operational matters with New Europe, eventually they got to the point where they couldn't sustain us anymore, and we had a really hard time trying to bridge over to new capital and new sources. And I'm like, okay, look, if I don't make a certain decision now, I'm going to end up on the street with Drazen if this trajectory keeps going the way it is. Okay. That ultimately, anyone that would look up my late mentor's name, Drazen Premate, ultimately you're going to find an article entitled like something like "Homeless Scientist like burns down church" or something. Anyway, that actually happened. Just like Nikola Tesla suffered greatly, in his later years because the world really wasn't ready to. Electricity was only one thing Nikola Tesla was working on.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, I know.
And that's all he ever. Okay. Drazen's story is kind of similar to Tesla's. Unlike Tesla, Drazen never realized one aspect or one iota of his proposals or his vision for CTP in his lifetime. Okay. And he eventually became homeless and he was on the streets of Orlando. And I could really do nothing for him, myself at the time. Okay. So from about 2011 to recently. Okay, eventually by 2013, 2014, Drazen was homeless and living on the streets of Orlando, kind of similar to Tesla. He was destitute, forgotten, nobody cared. And like I said, I'm just a guy from a normal income background like anyone else. I could not do anything for him. This is probably my greatest regret to this day. It still weighs on me. It really does. Okay,
Mhm.
this was not an easy thing for me to pick up what we call CTP and start presenting it to the world as like 2 years ago. So what happened? I started looking up at Draw's name around December 21. I want to start finding out like what happened to him. Like it's been years since I had interacted and heard from my late mentor, and I wanted to find out what happened to Drazen. Okay, well, it turns out he was later interned in a state ward. Okay, and he ends up dying. The like the regent or the tenant or whoever was in control of this ward was like embezzling and preying on all of the different wards and patients that were interned there.
Mhm.
So another woman died, and also my late mentor. Eventually, he ended up passing in 2019 at the age of 63, and I
Mhm.
had just found out as of December 21, okay, that Drazen was no longer with us. And so I'm like, next era of Tesla passed. World never even knew who he was. No one cared.
Just to expand the story a little bit, if I understood well, and I was very impressed, we will talk about CTB. Dragan was from Croatia, right?
Yes, he
Uh,
was originally born in Pula, Croatia
mhm.
in 1956, exactly, well, give or take, 100 years after Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856.
I know
Okay.
this. Mhm.
Yeah, and Drazen was born in 1956, and he was
Mhm.
born in Pula, a nice little kind of summer resortish. I've never been there by myself, but yeah, he was born in Croatia as well.
Yes, because I was born in Serbia. That was one country once upon a time.
Yugoslavia, yeah,
Yugoslavia, yes.
yeah.
And we know a lot about Nikola Tesla, and we know a lot
I'm
about
sure you do.
I we know a lot about his work, and not only the electricity, right? The electricity is something which is like famous today. He is now famous by that, but the healing processes and everything that Tesla did, we're very familiar with it. So I'm not surprised that someone from Croatia actually knew a lot about these things. Um, I'm very sorry for what happened to him, but now you have the opportunity because of the technology and everything to share this story and actually help him see the sunlight like Nikola Tesla saw it a long time after he passed away. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is actually CTP? I was extremely interested. I was impressed when you sent me the video. I watched it. I understood it completely, and I'm absolutely sure that my audience definitely want to know about this.
Okay. So how should we let's try because it's such a comprehensive science. Okay, it's really, if we were to take CTP just at face value, like just like in a nutshell, like
Mhm.
CTP. Okay. Um, so quantum physics has got to the point, it's very complicated science too. I mean, quantum physics, people look at them like,
Yeah.
it really is CTP by our standards would really be just as revolutionary and mind-blowing as quantum physics. However, CTP is much different than any of the other what we call sciences or physical sciences before it. Okay, and in the context of CTP Energy Science, that Drazen calls it that, we also refer to our science as CTP Sci or the CTP Sci Sciences, because it's an entire like suite of of science, like really next century. We could say this science is probably a minimum of 50 to 100 years from the future. Okay, so it's the applications for the science really can touch upon, by our standards right now, at least 12 to 14 industry verticals or so. Like once we're funded and we're further along, the implication of this science are really like almost what we consider like Star Trek or even a post Star Trek level. Okay, so the CTP is the world's first premier post quantum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a post quantum science,
Mm-hmm.
meaning after quantum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people like, see, in academia, in our science world today, there are two things that are really uncommon. One, an original idea, because you're always basing your work off of someone else's theories or their other okay, or there's always references to your work, your research, or some type of corresponding tie-in, or prior work that was already done. CTP is a
Mm-hmm.
little different, okay, and we'll see why in a minute. Okay, but basically, so as a post-quantum science, CTP is based on the new revelation that what we call P energy. Okay, so we have CT and P energy. Okay, let's first look at the P energy, because this will be this aspect of what we call physical energy or the P energy. This will be what most even lay people out there on the internet will already know. Okay, so they're basically over the past, however long science has been doing what science does, we've defined that there is what we call the four fundamental forces. Okay, these are gravity, and then electricity, and then magnetism, where eventually, electromagnetism was finally unified, during the 1800s, and then going into the atomic age. Okay, then, the works of like Marie Curie and Einstein
Mm-hmm.
came, and relativity, and then we started getting these guys like Bohr and Dirac and Max Planck and Schrodinger and all. I'm not sure if that's exactly how his name pronounced. I'm horrible with names sometimes. I guess please forgive me if I mispronounce Schrodinger's name. Okay, but we go in from into the second industrial revolution, all the things that were going on, late 1890s, 1800s, and we start going into the atomic age with Curie, and then like the likes of Einstein. They were great minds for the time. I'm not dismissing their contributions to humanity overall. When some of the days I'm kind of like, a little feisty. I'm like, like CTP is like, this, here comes CTP, it's not like not to dismiss their work. Okay. But we go
But to be honest, when I saw the video and when I understand what it is it about, Well, I have to agree that.
And yeah, people are like still like, so what is okay? So what is CTP? This is where so we get to okay. So we have gravity, electromagnetism, strong force, weak force, and then we go into quantum physics. Okay, so but even though like okay, so when you go into the quantum realm, you start getting your things like your different force carriers in quantum physics that are like happening at the subatomic domain or at the quantum domain level. You're having your things like your gluons, your quarks, your bosons, your fermions, and all the different like subdivision components that make up the smaller minute constituent physical properties of an atom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm.
By our standards with CTP energy, that is all still following in just specifically what we would call the P energy like delineation category only. Okay, so what is C and T? That's the big question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so behind these four fundamental forces, there's two more. What Drazen discovered is there's actually two more non-physical fundamental forces. Okay, non-physical meaning that these two, the C energy units and the T energy units have their own corresponding unit, and it's like a force carrier, but we really have to start taking our mind into new level thinking that these are not quantum.
Exactly.
These are
Exactly.
not quantum units. That's a lot of people, want to say, well, what's the relationship between quantum physics and CTP energy? Is that's like this where we break off. This is
Mm-hmm.
where we evolve to like what we would really consider the next level science
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. Okay, CTP Energy Science would also be if anyone's ever heard of Dr. Stephen Greer, he's world-renowned UFOologist. I don't have to speak on his behalf. I mean, he has done incredible work and contributed a lot to the field of ufology by any standards for one person. Okay, but ultimately, when Stephen Greer is talking about the conscience-assisted technologies, okay, ultimately, what Stephen Greer has been talking about, he may have not called it that or referred to it by name for the past 2 decades or so now, but ultimately, it would be Drazen, my late mentor's discovery of what we call the CTP Energy Science or the CTP Psi. CTP Energy Science, this is the ultimate science that the UFO or the UAP, okay, what we call the CTP technologies relative to us,
Uh-huh.
okay, the UFOs, UAPs, or CTP technologies, we call CTP craft because these craft behind me are based on this science. And the real secret, the real revolution, or the real revelation of the ages and the real UFO truth that's finally coming out that trust me, I've been hammering it, going on 3 years now on social media too, anywhere between hostile, lackluster, disinterested, skeptical, not really much interest. Uh, let's place the negatives and lack of support for CTP to date have really shadowed the consideration or support that I've seen today or that we've seen to date at all. Okay, so it's big pendulum swing difference between the level of support that we've seen. But ultimately, the real secret behind UFOs or what we call the alien technologies is that this is the science. CTP science is the science used by advanced civilizations, and what they're doing. The reason why this science is ultimately different than some of what we're already using today is because this science engages what we would call the additional fundamental forces that our present scientists today don't even really like. They either dismiss it, they say it doesn't exist, or because it's not physical, well, that's not not physical, whatever. Okay. But ultimately, the UFOs and UAPs engage two additional fundamental forces that are not presently accounted for via the standard model of physics. Ultimately, these two additional non-physical fundamental forces are part of the interplay that are ultimately part of the basis for the CTP propulsion systems that allow a craft such as this to repulse gravity and travel faster than light to faraway star systems, or even by our standards other galaxies, or you want to get really wild. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the science of how interdimensional or like interspatial travel works. It's all because there's two, like I said, there's two additional non-physical fundamental forces that these technologies are being integrated with. Okay, and we're not even at kindergarten level relative to our planetary civilization today, where other civilizations may have evolved or advanced to, much beyond our current capacity with this. Because this is, like I said, this is a new science. Most people, you're not going to hear about this in any college or academia setting. However, you will hear people like Dean Radin and his and Institute of the Network Sciences that have been trying to do their work with pioneering consciousness and related like conscious sciences for the past ever since Edgar Mitchell was the original founder of ions. I will at least cite them and respect their work and give them the credit that due for what they've contributed towards things like alternative thought, holistic healing, and that group's done a lot. Okay,
Yeah, these
big.
days actually, it's much better than it was in time of Drazen or even Nikola Tesla. I mean, we are aware of higher level of consciousness, at least people who are
Yes.
awakened, right? We are aware of higher level of awareness. We are aware of the higher beings and the connection with them. You can freely speak about that, but the science is limited to the power of our mind, but every single person who touched the higher level of consciousness or awareness or even 11th level, like Elon Musk, for
Mhm,
example, they for
mhm.
sure understand this. So P stands for the physical energy, and we are almost all of us are aware of that, right? But T and C are the core of the difference between any other science field and the
Yes.
CTP. What
Yes.
does T and C stand for?
Okay. Okay. So we have the non-physical conscience or C energy.
Hmm.
Okay, and then we have a second type of C energy. It's called the translation, what Drazen would call the translational or the T energy. The translational energy, its job, the best way to how should we describe it? Okay, so
Maybe like a computer system, like an
kind of,
interpreter
yeah, yeah.
between.
The total, what we call the CTP forces or the CTP energy cycle, okay, which is ultimately is kind of like uh, chain. Okay, it's a
Mhm.
chain of energy and forces and processes. The CTP energy cycle basically acts like what we would call a rendering engine, like the same way when you're on your computer and you want to render, like let's say I'm working in a recording software and I want to render my song to WAV file or
Yes,
MP3. Okay,
yes, yes.
or I'm working in video and I want to render my video to an MP4 so I can upload it to YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well the thing is, the audio software and or the video software that does that rendering job is not the output file that it creates. CTP is kind of similar in this manner, is that the end result of our physical reality is not the ultimate, what we call the ultimate baseline or the prima mobile or the actual catalyst forces that actually make this reality. What we see here in our physical world, this is the end result of the overall CTP like coding and rendering processes. Okay, so
Yes.
CTP, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're following so forth, so like CTP is like this rendering engine that brings Drazen would say that CTP, the T energy, translational energy, codes the thoughts. This is the wild thing. Codes the thoughts of groups of C energy units into the vibrations of the particular physical world. Okay, so that means that everyone is wondering if we're like in some type of simulation. Okay, or what's the nature of this simulation, and this is ultimately the coding or the like reality rendering process of how that simulation actually works and does the job. So behind the physical forces, like okay, so if we have your physical reality would be like up here, and below even the quantum or the Planck length. Okay, there's another C energy unit called the translational unit underneath it, and then ultimately that connects it down even further into what we would call the non-physical C layer, and that ultimately that would be where that like it's we could really even consider that non-physical C layer even really below what other people would call like So, the 0 point technologies interface with the quantum flux vacuum or the quantum vacuum. For our purposes, relative to this science, that non-physical C layer would be absolute dead zero, even further at where that 0 point actually is. Okay, and so what the applications for understanding how this science works is that ultimately we will interface more and further with this non-physical C field, and with this we'll have new new innovations that are based on this science, where we're integrating this non-physical C field into things like propulsion systems, communications technologies that will allow us for near instantaneous communication between different worlds and other star systems, not only a couple of light years away, but we're talking like light years upon light years, all the way to interstellar, intergalactic, or even trans reality
Mhm.
communication via this science. Ultimately, this science will be what we would call the multi-dimensional, or the like, almost what we would cue from Star Trek. I would rather use the Traveler as a better you know, uh, meant, like Traveler was a much better guy than Q was in a lot of ways. But ultimately, this is the inter-reality, like higher, like next level science. Okay, and interfacing with the C field will allow us to pioneer not just advances in communication and propulsion and healing, which is big in itself. Okay, but ultimately, what drives our physical aging? Okay, I've got white beard, or I'm 20 years older now than when I first met Drazen. Okay, but ultimately, physically makes us age, or all ultimately also tied into these CTP processes and the information, the real magic. Okay, people talk about water memory. Okay, they've done all these experiments like with water and ice memory. Okay, but ultimately, it's like all of that consciousness or that know-how that happens like at the biological level, like what actually drives our DNA processes, what makes us age. Ultimately, it's all of that empty space that when you look to an atom. You have all this. You have your atomic nucleus. Okay, and then you have your electron shell going out here. But
Mhm.
ultimately, like, you have all this space, all that space in the in the inner orbit of what makes an atom. But ultimately, all of that's non-physical C energy, and there's non-physical, non-quantum information in there. And that is where the holy grail of science ultimately, like I said, it's not just the holy grail of space propulsion or anti-aging. That's the holy grail of all sciences, is getting into that non-physical C layer, where ultimately that ultimate baseline of reality, that's where the real magic and innovation that we will pioneer into our future and into future generations, that's where the big, like we call magic science, that's really the
And this is
implications.
this is the first time I hear that these concepts are actually have a scientific approach, right? A lot of spiritual teachers like Dr. Beckett or Teal Swan explained these concepts, right? Just
Right.
for our audience to understand,
Yes.
the world we live in is the 3D world, right? Without the
Yeah.
senses, we really don't see or hear or smell much, right? It's just the perception of this world. But the timelines are maybe in parallel. Maybe there are parallel universes, right? I've learned about quantum jumping and about astral traveling and about all of these things, right? What you are saying here is that we are aware of the physical reality, we are aware of the physical energy. We're not aware, maybe a little bit, that there is like a transmission energy which allows us to have internet and Wi-Fi and all of these technologies nowadays. Now
Mhm.
we go back to Tesla, who said that the energy is unlimited. There is no need to charge for energy because it can be unlimited. He also said that the healing can be done very rapidly with the different energetic fields. And what you're saying about sea level, that's actually a higher force, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
and the higher force, however we call it, translated through the T segment, is affecting the 3D reality. right? And it goes like a chain, uh,
Right.
going back and forth. But what you said is extremely important because it's obvious that people don't understand, right? Maybe Elon Musk would understand. Maybe he would be interesting because he wants to move us to Mars, right? And now
Right.
we might make jokes about him, but he is going to do that for sure, because he said there it can be just a second when something hits the earth and we will be all gone, right? What you're saying here that we can go much higher and much further, actually creating a way to travel through space, right? To have a speed which is unlimited, to like not depend on gravity and all of these things. And I think that's really, really possible. Just no one actually that I know explained it scientifically. And
Right, right. See, well, see, this is one of the big. If I can call you Kat, that's fine. Okay, Kat,
Catherine, yeah. Hmm.
Catherine. Okay, Catherine. This is one of the major areas where CTP we're likely that this we have to say like what CTP is bringing into our world by our standards today is about the same level of like impact that the giants of yesteryear in terms of scientific revolutions when Nicholas Copernicus proposed that it was actually the Earth going around the sun. And when Galileo was showing the church authorities, like, okay, well, there's moons that orbit Jupiter. And then they're looking through his telescope and they're like, some of them were like, wow, this is, we're getting a whole new level of like scientific revelation about the nature of the, what, reality of what we live in. And then there on the flip side, there were the other guys in the church were like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we don't see anything. We don't see any. There's nothing there. You're crazy, Galileo. You're no. We're not going to listen to you. Don't. And then because of power and authority and peer pressure, all the guys that were or could have actually spoke out and defended Galileo. Ultimately, a lot of them turned tailcoat and got coward. No one wants to risk, excommunication or damnation of their soul from their other church authorities that say heretic Galileo. And that's what happened about 400, 500 years ago or so when Galileo was around. This science, okay, and this is what we really have to understand that there's two sides of where CTP is going to impact our world. There's going to be negative association, there's going to be negative repercussions from some of the public response, but this is also like this is where we need to go. Okay, um, in the world of metaphysics and spirituality, like you go across all of the different nations of our world today, and all your different spiritual beliefs, whether it's this Abrahamic religion or that not non-Abrahamic thing, or this Eastern thing over here, this tribal belief, from Africa, darkest Africa, or parts of like tribal Southeast Asia, or even like tribal South American rainforest. The whole world over, everyone's got their whole spiritual beliefs about like everything about what spirituality means to me. And over the past 40 to 60 years, the past century, ever since like theosophy and a lot of your Western esoteric New Age kind of started really been getting a lot more social dominance over the past 100 years. New Age has come in, and everyone's like, oh, there's so all these metaphysical beliefs, like just everything's everywhere. We all have our beliefs. This science, the same way that if you have a pen
Uh-huh.
and you drop it, gravity universally like affects this pen given the certain conditions and rules and corresponding action in physics that are responsible for this pen not only to exist in our reality but for this action to happen. There's like a universal understanding that applies to like gravity and what we consider physics. Okay, same thing too. It's like and I've used this slogan before on my social media. It's like, okay, so just as the laws of physics are universal in our physical domain, so too are the non-physical laws of C domain, okay, that apply to each of us equally, regardless of what our spiritual beliefs or our spiritual inclinations regarding these matters address. Because and you really have to understand this world, our world actually needs the science more there. We got people in the Mid East, the whole Gaza, Israeli, you got people killing themselves still over religion of all things. We're killing people over the basis of where we think we're going to go when we die, where we go. We send the people we don't like there first.
Yes.
It's mass insanity by any standards. Okay, so while over the past 2,000 years, while we've advanced in our sciences and our technologies, okay, obviously our world, well, some places in our world are still as brutal as ancient Rome or dark Europe. But I would say a certain when it comes to where we are as a planetary civilization today, maybe we're not quite as bad as ancient Rome. Okay, well, like we've advanced our sciences, we've advanced our consciousness to degrees. Okay, but so while we've advanced our sciences and technologies, we're still basing you really, when it comes to what we understand of our spirituality and our spiritual existence, we're still mostly basing all of those beliefs off of civilizations that existed, in 2,000 to 1,000 years ago. Like we are so far from understanding the real science that truly applies to our real spiritual nature as a science that is not based on, all of Drazen's positions with CTP that he discovered. It's not based on his opinion. It's not based on his belief. Drazen, before he passed, he was a space scientist. Okay, he discovered CTP by accident. Okay, in March 1985, he had his first out-of-body experience around the age of 29. He was like, wow. And then it happened again the next night and again. And so eventually he said, well, I'm a scientist. And while I'm here, Drazen basically started having these out of body experiences with memory recall. Okay. And he's like, well, I'm going to explore this new domain that what I call the C domain, where the conscious energy and the C energy exists. We call C domain. That would be the scientific name for what we call our spiritual world, the afterlife, or the proto reality, or the multiverse. Ultimately, this is the scientific name for what Muslims would call Jannah, or what Christians would call heaven. What we call the C domain would be the scientific name for a true spiritual home that we all come from. And we go there each night in our sleep to recharge our spiritual body. People have wondered like about the nature of consciousness for decades. And so why do we sleep? And they're ultimately we sleep and to recharge our C body needs to recharge its natural habitat every night to rebalance and revitalize itself. And then basically what happens is in the next morning, we wake up, our spiritual body is coming in, locking in, and we wake up and we're like, okay, wow. We go about our day almost completely oblivious, to the spiritual existence that we're concurrently living with our physical reality. But here's the problem, and this is what Drazen discovered. Our spiritual body has like two minds, okay? So each mind governs each domain of existence and which body it commands. Okay, so in the physical world, our ego mind runs this body. Like here, I can move my hand, scratch my head, pick up a tool, type on a keyboard, manipulate reality physically this way. Okay, but when you go out of your body, a different group of what we call the C energy units. It's like I said, it's these non-physical, non-quantum. Can't even call them particles. There's completely. You have to think completely different terms for this. But mostly, our higher mind's made of a different group of these C energy units. And when we're out at night, ultimately it determines where we want to go. This waking mind that runs our physical body is really not a lot to say in that issue. Okay, so spiritually, the way we're actually built is we're kind of like a dual boot, and I've said this on a number of interviews or other citations. We're like the same way if you would have a dual boot like Linux and Windows PC, you'll have two different operating systems that may be running on like Windows will run like an NTFS file system, and then like on Linux you may have like ext4 or BRTFS or other file systems. Spiritually, we're kind of built like that same way. So when we wake up, and this happens to us a lot. We wake up and it's like, man, I had this really good, like really clear thing I'd seen while I was sleeping. It was like this brilliant idea, and I wake up and I'm like, where it went? Okay, that's because we didn't store it properly in the proper like file system. Okay, And what Drazen figured out with his science and his discoveries, he figured out how to do this and actually extract information from up there and bring it across incrementally over a period of 20 years. And that's how, okay, so also like, talking about like, well, what are the benefits of this? Okay, what people call the Akashic record, we understand the scientific principles of how to actually one day interface with it as a science, and we will be able to communicate with, civilizations at those levels or greater, or in along different time periods. And all of the information that could ever, will ever, or ever be known, it's all out up there in the pseudo,
In Akashic records, yeah, in the
it will, or what we would call pseudomain. So basically, the same way people mine Bitcoin and crypto, eventually this science will allow us to actually data mine from there and bring revolutionary new innovations we would consider by our standards like unimaginable, as far as things like power, transit, energy, healing. um this ultimately, this is the big value of this science, that we will be able to extract and get information that we could never really access otherwise, uh quite the same level. Like, okay, here's a good example. Every poem you ever thought of, every painting you've ever considered, painting, every symphony, every pop song hit, they all exist up there. What makes us spiritual entities is that we can tune into these concepts, okay, via our thoughts, because they're up there, and then we bring these ideas across into our physical world. So all the things we see, like the internet and modern innovations of today, they already existed priorly. Everything, thought, the basis, if we could sum up all of CTP in one sentence: thought precedes reality. And it always does. Before I can move my hand, I have to think of moving my hand.
yes.
Same too with innovation and new technologies. Uh, and that's really the basis of CTP right there. The thought precedes the reality. So when it comes to new tech, new innovations, uh, really anything, everything Elon Musk has ever thought of, before they had Starship rockets or space, all of all of our ideas and all of our ingenuity ultimately all comes from our true, what I would call our spiritual genius, and we underutilize
Yes,
collectively
and people,
as a society. As a society, we underutilize the true nature that our genius can really, like, I don't want to say like tap into, because it's not, I don't want to say we're channeling. Okay, this is not, we need to, certain things with like new age and metaphysics, we need to move away from like those tropes and bring in like new science terms to start advancing us forward, because even the trap of new age and metaphysics is still like in the cluster of the container of those thought forms. So bringing in CTP science brings in like the new thought, new ideas, and we're actually going to utilize. And part of the startup and the education also involves not only in training people, like, we're about increasing our spiritual intuition and aspects, but we're not doing it like the way people into metaphysics or witchcraft or covens or whatever. Those are, no. This would be like the same way you read a Microsoft manual on Windows desktop or Windows server, or SQL database server. We will develop a curriculum similar, but instead of it being based on computer tech or technologies, we'll actually apply to the science of how our spirituality actually works.
hmm just
It's a
to make it
completely,
a little bit clearer for the people who listen, Akashic records are like a library with different levels of understanding. Everything that
right.
ever existed as an information, everything that does exist, and everything that will exist in the future is stored in this, let's call it a database, right?
Right.
We know there are techniques for accessing Akashic records, but what you're saying here, the interface can be built, which can help us to actually access all this knowledge
Well,
and help us move the civilization further. Is that correct?
Right. Okay. Well, see, the thing is, the interface is really it's already there. Okay. So like our C body and the C energy units is made up. Like we're already part of it. Like we're already like we're just
Mm-hmm.
the best way to describe it. Like we're already interfaced with it, but we're not interfaced with it in a way that we understand. Kind of like the driver's manual of a car. You can get in a car and you can drive a car, but you have to experience, you have to go through to actually use a car as a tool to get you from point A to point B. This science, it will provide like kind of like a new toolkit. Uh, and it's not just like, oh, we're going to learn like how to, like Zen out or TM, you know, this will allow us to gain a deeper understanding of the way our spirituality works. And even I would say, contemporary New Age practices like, transcendental meditation or yoga. I mean,
Yeah, but this
uh,
can be actually a moonshot idea
yeah,
because
this would be a more, like I said, of a kind of like, tech manual or techno science way of how to advance new breakthroughs that wouldn't have been possible before with just using some of the popular people call the hoodoo or the woo woo like techniques that have availed themselves over the past 100 years. This is a completely different level. First of all, people into these topics need to understand that this is a completely different level of science that will avail us not only, I don't want to say new abilities. However, we'll be able to build and utilize, these CTP technologies will harness more of what we call this the C energy. Like I said, for different applications, and part of these we'll actually be able to. One of our systems designs is kind of like a lounge or like like a recliner, and like just like in the Matrix, when the people disconnected from the Matrix and they went into the real world, they were still able to like reconnect into the Matrix through the interface and go back into the Matrix. Okay, well, so one of our systems is kind of like that, but instead of using a spaceship to travel the universe or go anywhere, we'll actually be able to use our spiritual body as its own type of spacecraft and allow us to have a full memory recall of when we're out and recount these memories when we're back here in an awakened state. Okay,
hmm
some
hmm
of these different, CTP systems will have in CTP holistic centers, um, and later, eventually, we may get to the point where we actually have like consumer devices similar to like this, where you'll have like this, this big, kind of like this console thing that you'll put towards like the head of your bed or under your bed, and that when you go to sleep at night, you'll basically have more and more memories of naturally what you experienced, the night before. So when you wake up the next day, you're like,
hmm
you know,
hmm
it won't just be this blur of flashing images or a dissociative information that you couldn't recall when you wake up. You'll have a better idea of ultimately, like, hey, that this is my other life. This is what's going on right now. You
hmm
know,
I think
and,
this is I think this is absolutely brilliant, and it took like more than 100 years for people to understand Tesla. I hope it will not take so much for people to understand CPT. I think we're much closer now because we experienced a lot of things, very beautiful things. And I'm very glad we had this conversation and this interview because it's going to stay over there forever. And one day when as I said, I hope it will not take so long. When people start understanding this and implementing this, this is going to be one of the first interviews that you actually shared about this topic. I will do my best to spread it everywhere I can on all my social media and every podcast platform and everywhere because I really believe in this idea. I knew something like this existed, just I didn't know there is a form. I felt it. And somehow I am connected with Tesla and I know a lot about his work. And I know this is the next step. And I'm very grateful to you for sharing these ideas and for going out in the world to spread this idea, because I really think this could be a moonshot idea. And if Elon Musk is listening to this by any chance, and it might happen on X, I think that he would definitely understand, and this might be actually helpful for his projects. If anyone would like to reach out to you or connect with you, what would be the best way? I guess LinkedIn, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, the LinkedIn forced me to change my name because of their like TOS or whatever. The best way to find me would be to Google something as like a link sharing kind of like referral site called Linktree. Look up Linktree/Reso RESO Factor. Linktree Reso Factor will have a number of different like my Facebook, my Twitter, X now, my LinkedIn, my YouTube, and
I will find
other
the link and
social
include it
profiles.
in a
Um,
description.
One thing though, I would really like to stress to your audience or any future views out there, first before we disconnect from this interview, is when you go through some of my content, if you see that I'm having a bad day, okay, or some of it's kind of like what we call a bit brash, or a little bit edgy, you have to understand, okay, imagine being in my position taking this science out to our world today. It's not, some days this is a really, this was the hardest. This was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make in my entire life, to pick up this science after finding out, my late mentor passed, because of the repercussions, or the, like, a lot of feedback I get, on an average day, a lot of it is really not all that positive. So any of you, like, that are into these topics and, see me, just thank you for your patience. Understand where I'm coming from. That's not all me. That's just, consequence of some of what I'm facing. It's been a really hellacious and stressful 3 years on my part, trying to network and,
I can only imagine, because people
I,
simply don't understand at this point, and that's very natural. How
yeah.
they can understand, right?
Yeah, no, so between, between being ghosted and dropped emails and people saying they're going to help our startup, and then, the times that, all the times, hundreds, thousands of times now people haven't come through, or, it's just like, wow, man, I cannot begin to convey, the last 3 years I would, and I mean, it's not, I signed up for this. I know, okay, what the future, we're just starting. So
Yeah, but
there's
look
that.
at it this way: if you lose,
Yeah.
the idea might have died with Drazen, right? So maybe this
It
is the
almost did. It
process.
almost did. Yeah, it almost did. And I like, there's too much at stake to the future for humanity's sake, that this science can ultimately avail for our good. I couldn't let it. I couldn't let it pass with it in good conscience. Yeah,
I
because
am.
like I said, if the world responds favorably, and we really go viral in the near future, and what I would say to anyone, before we close this interview, is that if we can really start getting the traction, interest, and support, and ultimately what I hope, because this is the disclosure science. CTP, I don't know about aliens in government bunkers or recovered craft. That's my priorities, or our priorities with CTP aren't in that, okay? But this would be the disclosure science. This is the science these craft use. And Chihuahua. Um, our goal is that after we would pioneer the R&D required to make these small craft, from here we would go on to what we call the larger space systems, or the CTP space liners. Our goal is to achieve like interstellar travel within the next decade or so. That would be the most important thing, that others out there should say, well, why would I get on board with this? Is if you really want Star Trek level tech, I know the science is required now today to start working on all the, like the trajectory for all of this we call the nth industrial revolution. Okay, you had the second industrial revolution with Tesla. Drazen would be the father of this industrial revolution. This science will bring in, we call the nth industrial revolution. I really already know most of the sciences and engineering, or where, this research needs to lead, that we could actually attain something like a Star Trek like possible civilization within our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
This is our commitment, and this is our goal, that we bring humanity up to a new level. Because you look at the world today as it is, we really need to do something else with
We really
ourselves.
need to do something, and we really need to change. Like as you said, people are still fighting, and the reason is religion, which is so low, and like it was humanity tried to explain something they don't understand, and because I was born in one place, I I'm Orthodox Christian. But if I was born in another place, I would maybe be a Muslim, right? So we need to fight why exactly. I mean, it's very, very like I have to say, very stupid, very, very stupid. But
We could, yeah, yeah. Imagine if all of the energy that we put into war. Nikola Tesla had a great quote: "If your hate could be turned into electricity, it would
yes, it
power the
would
entire
power
world."
the entire world. Yes,
Imagine if just as Nikola Tesla lit our world, to light the human spirit with the ingenuity we can really all attain. If we were putting a fraction of the energy that we put into, political arguments, discourse, hating people online on social media, getting to arguments, political debates, hate, war, and all of the breakdowns we see happening in our society today, Catherine, if we put a fraction of that energy
into something good.
into something like CTP, and we had other people like coming in and say, "Okay, yeah, I want to get involved in rather like let's bring humanity, let's go next level." What we could achieve in 10 years or to 20 years, a generation into our future would be unprecedented.
Yes,
And this ultimately what our commitments are with CTP, not just as a deep tech startup, but ultimately our life program and our life trajectory and our future trajectory. Ultimately, this is ultimately, if it because if we do not go in this direction, the direction that certain other power interests in our world have, to
will destroy
like
them.
reducing population, restriction of resources, restriction of energy, restriction of food. There's a lot of what I would call an insane response to what's going on in our world. It's going to be like that way, or hopefully, we can pursue other alternatives that are ultimately more higher aligned to us actually having a better existence, than all, most of humanity living in poverty and only a very small, you know, number at the top having all. And the other thing I would want to tell, well, what if you would annoy them, or it's like, well, hey, I would tell the world elite this too. If you invest in support and fund CTP, you would be able to travel on space liners and travel to, like, let's say the Orion constellation is about 15,000 light years away. Imagine having a corporate function or a corporate luncheon, like in a stellar nebula, and seeing that out of your port side window on one of our craft. Like, we can service your needs also. We this science, we want to make as much available for humanity as possible. There's preliminary, like, private R&D we need to do first, before we would start revealing patent secrets or trades. But ultimately, this science is for humanity, but we have our own, as just as a tech organization, there are milestones. We have to create our own science foundation. We
Mhm.
have to create I have to find, staff to train in this science. We have all the mundane aspects of, launching a business, investment traction, capital, like, building the core corporate foundation, all that stuff I consider rather, there are other corporate capacities can serve that, and do that work for us. But this is ultimately about humankind going the next level. And this is really what I would say. Hey, if anyone listens and hears these words, like, you know let's do something else with our future than
You know,
destroy it.
I see a very bright future, and I see myself one day in 5 or 10 years saying, "Hey, I interviewed that guy." So I'm very honored and very grateful that you came to my show. I think you are doing an amazing thing, and that this is truly your purpose. And the first step is talking about that. I'm very glad that I could help with this and spread the word about this. And I hope more and more people will get aware and more people will come on board and that this, and I have goosebumps now, so that's a good that's a good sign. And I see that you're going towards light and that you want to help people. And I'm sure that you want to create a legacy for Drazen because he didn't have a chance. I can feel that. So thank you for doing this and thank you for being my guest. I truly, truly enjoyed and I hope you did too.
Thank you a million, Catherine. And don't forget, there are always follow-up interviews possible later this year to see where we are from today.
I would
We look
love
for.
that. I
I
would
would look
love that.
forward.
But not just this year, like in
Yeah,
5 or 10 years,
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
maybe you will call me from outer space. And I'm not joking about this. I truly
yeah,
believe in
yeah.
this. I'm very, very well aware. I was a scientific person, very, very strongly scientific person. I got ill. Coxsackie virus demolished my heart. I had 22,000 stops a day. My mom took me to monastery. I had the spiritual experience there one night. I came back home, went to do medical tests, and I was perfectly healthy. Since then, I was researching everything that Nikola Tesla did, everything about spirituality. I know a lot about these things, just I never found a source that is talking about these things from the scientific level, and that source is you. So, this is why I'm very, very grateful. And if there is any way that I can help and support, I will be there, be sure. Thank you for
All
being
right.
my guest. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.